So next we have, speaking of dealing with hardship, you know, used to be being on a flight attendant is a dream job where many people actually, I I dreamt of being one when I was still younger. Nowadays, with the pandemic and people resuming, traveling abroad or traveling elsewhere, flight attendants have to deal with unprecedented violence, according to the article here, as travel returns and passengers' aggression soars. So, according to the article here at businessinsider.com, it mentions that one of those flight attendants, experienced an aggressive passenger who was intoxicated from drinking alcohol, and then she was she was told that if I had the Black Lives Matter shirt, this would not be a problem. Now, obviously, the person is intoxicated, may not be thinking properly, but again, the aggression can escalate. Can obviously imagine that, thousands of miles up in the sky, and then you're confined in a small space, then dealing with several people, not just one or multiple people, and doing this for several hours at a time, especially for long haul flights. It's getting to a point that's becoming more less attractive, more worrisome than one would assume. Anyway, so let's take a closer look. So as mentioned here, to the point that the airline had to call for police to remove that passenger from the aircraft. So it's getting to that point. It used to be that, you could talk to person, settle them down, and then, continue with the flight. And it's not just this isolated incident. So the incidents are increasing across the country, where flight attendants have to deal with the rise of passenger aggression. Now, obviously, the aggression and violence stems from, the policy or the mandatory of wearing face masks. Do we need to wear it? Do we need to be consensus regarding other people's safety? Now, obviously, in the United States, it's different than compared to other countries. So, some may say, as long as the government says it's not required, then you can remove it. But obviously, for an airline where you are cramped with several people, those policies may change depending on the airlines here. And obviously, the brunt of those tension, the flight attendant has to deal with it, which is kind of unfair if you think about it. So obviously, the government has to step in, or even the airline companies themselves. If you want to book a flight with our airlines, you have to follow strict policies. If there is indeed a strict policy regarding, wearing face masks, or do you have to be vaccinated, all of those nitty gritty details before you even arrive in the aircraft, so forth, so that the flight attendant can only focus on ensuring you enjoy, you have an enjoyable experience during your flight, rather than dealing with this, other issues that's technically not their fault. They're just implementing what's being uh, told by the upper management here. And obviously, since January 2021, or this early this year, the Federal Aviation Administration has received a staggering amount. So, more than, or a little over 2,500 reports. So 2,500 reports of unruly behavior by passengers. Now, that may not seem a lot, but still, if you're inside an aircraft, jam packed with other people, that can instigate a lot of, to the point of riot. So hopefully not, but obviously it brings a lot of stress to those people who are working for a living, especially for those flight attendant. Assuming they're trying to do their job, and added burden of dealing with this stress is obviously not helpful, to the extent of people, attendants leaving their job, some even at worst committing suicide to that extent. So question is, what are the airlines supposed to do? What can they do to help and avoid this to begin with? Obviously, you don't want to remove passengers all of a sudden, but there has to be a certain standard or policy in place to protect the interests of the airline, the passengers, even the flight stewards, or even the pilot themselves. And obviously, the flight attendants are bearing the brunt of the passengers' aggression, which is kind of unfair, right? Obviously, you have two sides to a coin. Obviously, you have the passenger side; they have their rights that they want to exercise. Then, obviously, the flight steward or the attendant has their job at stake here. If they don't follow, they might get fired and so forth, right? And what was extreme here, an example that happened: a flight steward from Southwest Airlines lost two teeth from an assault of a passenger. That's how extreme, flying, riding, traveling, from one place to another. So this is kind of concerning, and if this is not addressed quickly, things can go out of hand quickly, and no one wants to travel if that's going to be the experience. Imagine if you have kids traveling with you, right? It's one thing if it's just adults traveling, and if you have kids, let's say you have pregnant moms traveling, you could just imagine. And it was mentioned also there were three flight attendants who were part of the, they called it therapy or therapy. It's an acronym. Who died by suicide because of the stress of it. Now, whether it's related due to the stress of the flight or maybe because of the pandemic, maybe scared of losing a job, and so forth, the uncertainty. But still, it all compounds those problems, and it doesn't help anyone. You don't enjoy the flight. The the workers, the attendants are dealing with it as best as they can. Maybe the company can do something about it so that these things does not proceed over time. You can just imagine the stress you have to deal if it's a long haul flight, especially if it's 12 hours, 16 hours, or even longer than that. And what's interesting here is obviously being a flight attendant is what many want to do, especially if you enjoy traveling. And even though it has its ups and downs, that's part of the job. But now, according to a New York City-based flight attendant, she mentions that the constant anxiousness, the worriness of the job that it entails, whether it's worth it to do it anymore. Now, obviously, if you rely on that job, then you have no choice but to continue. But still, can companies do something about it? Looking at those CEOs, obviously these are your frontliners that deals with your customers. And if your customer doesn't have a great experience, they might not come back and you know choose your airline as their next viable option. Actually, there were options that was mentioned that there was an off-duty attendant who was taken to a hospital due exhibiting signs of mental illness when assaulted, you know, when they were assaulted on a flight. So you could just imagine, traveling in the sky who used to be a glamorous job now could be considered a dangerous job all of a sudden. Hopefully it doesn't get too extreme to a point that people would think twice if traveling is still safe, not just the airplane itself, but the people who are inside traveling with you.